Well, good afternoon. Welcome to our press conference, and it's going to be one on something we're calling the Retire in Minnesota Act. Heather would get a kick out of this. It's not unlike the Right to See Act. This is all about retiring in Minnesota, and it's about Social Security. And I would say I think it sort of takes off a little bit on what the governor did this morning with respect to an announcement relative to, I understand, some tax credits for child care, the youth part of our society. And this, of course, deals with the more senior people in Minnesota, the golden generation, or whatever we might want to call them, people that have been around here and, frankly, to some great extent, built our state, and I think to which we owe some level of obligation. So as we talk about this and we talk about our state, certainly the demographics we all know have changed. I've got some numbers here. Seniors numbered 91,000 and this is 65 or over, in the year 2000. And that increased, frankly, all the way up to 285,000 in 2010. Projected to be 335,000 in 2020. And then, by the way, because Social Security in some cases can be about disability or people taking it at 62, the numbers actually that this particular act starts to affect are much, frankly, greater than that, all the way up to over 600,000. So as our society is changing, I think this becomes a point of greater awareness, and i.e. that we're taxing Social Security. And I'm proud, by the way, to note my colleagues with me today, the co-authors here, Senator Nelson's here, and Senator Dames over here, Senator Kiffmeyer, Senator John Peterson's not here, but he's certainly on it. Of course, we have Senator Hand and Senator Limmer, and who else here? And I especially want to welcome Will Phillips from the American Association of Retired People. Indeed, Republicans are joining ARP at this point on a journey which I hope takes us to the successful conclusion of this bill, that being passage. So as we talk about where we are and certainly where we're going and where other people are in particular, 38 states don't tax this at all. 29 of those states have by purpose eliminated the Social Security tax. 9, frankly, don't have an income tax, so they're not affected. So individuals in Minnesota and, frankly, across the country have a number of states that they can live in and go to where Social Security is not taxed. 7 states, including Minnesota, do tax Social Security. 6 others have recognized the issue and put together some form of exclusions or so on that don't completely eliminate the tax but certainly modify it. As we're going about this, it's a phased-in process, frankly, much like the Iowa bill. And the Iowa bill, by the way, I'll talk about it later, but was brought to legislation in 2006, and it's an 8-year bill, which is concluding now. But it is similar to that bill, a phase-in. The first year, it would cost $40 million. The second year, $87 million, so we're biennium then at $127 million. That is not to say, however, that Social Security and people in Minnesota aren't paying a lot of Social Security tax. I've got some numbers here. They're paying this year, pardon me, going in 2017, they're paying $398 million. They will pay $437 million in 2018, and if you go out to 2019, projectedly, $477 million. That is a lot of money which our seniors are paying into state government, and there are choices in this world, and part of those choices are moving to other places. So I think we need to think about that. I think, frankly, Social Security was enacted as a benefit a long time ago, 1935. We're taxing a benefit here. I think that's, generally speaking, unconscionable. We shouldn't have ever done it in the first place. I think it's unconscionable also to think about taxing a benefit for the second time. Social Security in and of itself is a tax. That's how you accrue the money. And indeed, we're taxing a tax. So double taxation, I think we need to think about that. And from my point of view, it's unconscionable. But also we're talking about state competitiveness. And as we have this emerging baby boomer generation coming through the system who have choices and who can Facebook and can FaceTime and do everything else, communications back to the family is a little easier now than it was, frankly, even 20 or 30 years ago. And so people do have choices about where they live. You can literally live anywhere across the South, Texas to Florida, and not be taxed for your Social Security. You can go from literally Iowa to Pennsylvania, all across the Midwest, not be taxed. South Dakota is not taxed on income anyway, but Wisconsin doesn't have a tax. Iowa, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't have a tax. All of the eastern seaboard, except Connecticut, is not taxed for Social Security. So people have a lot of choices in terms of where to go and to, frankly, accrue the benefit of non-taxation of their Social Security benefit. So as we think about this, and I'll go back to Iowa as I conclude, but Iowa did this in 2006. They did it in a bipartisan fashion. In the House, the vote was in the Senate, the vote was 46-4. In the House, it was 89-6. It was referred to at the conclusion of that session as the crown jewel of that session. And as we're now 8 years later, and it was an 8-year cycle, they're concluding their tax. It's completely, virtually eliminated now in Iowa, and I think we can do the same today. So I'm going to conclude by thanking you for coming, and also now calling on Senator Dames, who has a few comments, and we'll go through a few of these, and then we'll certainly take questions. Senator Dames?
Well, thank you, Senator Senjum. The Retire in Minnesota Act certainly is an act that should help our senior citizens. Our retirees are a real asset into our communities. And when we look at these retirees, many of these folks are still providing and helping in the workforce. If we take a look at our retirees, these folks do a lot of volunteer work. We take a look at our retirees. They're very involved in their faith-based communities. They're very involved usually in their schools. And if you look at, especially in rural Minnesota, when we take a look at the makeup of our small communities, the retirees, in many cases, are a large share of those small communities. And it's very important that we keep our seniors in Minnesota. And as we see, we have more seniors that move out of Minnesota, and they're going to other states. And the states that they're going to, the states I refer to as the states that are drawing our seniors, they do not have this tax. They're not taxing Social Security. And I think that's one more step that we can do to keep our seniors here, to keep them viable, and to keep them in our communities, and to keep them as part of Minnesota. Many of these folks were born in Minnesota, they were raised in Minnesota, they raised their children in Minnesota, and now we need to help them stay in Minnesota. So I think that this is, the Retire in Minnesota Act is going to be one step that can help with that, and I look forward to moving this legislation through the process. And now I'll turn it over to Carla Nelson. Senator Nelson.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. Retire in Minnesota Act, long overdue and much needed. The state in which one lives should not reduce federal Social Security benefits through double taxation like we do in the state of Minnesota. If we listen to our hearts, we know that we all would retire in Minnesota as Minnesotans. But if we listen to our pocketbooks and our financial planners, unfortunately we realize that almost every other state in the nation is a far superior state in which one can maximize their retirement benefits. 10,000 people woke up today and turned 65. This is a national statistic. Tomorrow, 10,000 people will turn 65. And the next day, and the next, and the next, for the next 19 years. Minnesota, similarly, has multitudes of Minnesotans hitting that retirement age on a daily basis, and we will for the next 19 years. We know, it's a fact, money walks. Money walks. Minnesota can ill afford to have policies that export wealth, and that's what this policy is doing. It is high time that we encourage retirement in Minnesota. I think this act will do it, and it's past time that we get it done. Thank you.
I'd like to now introduce Will Phillips. Will is State Director for AARP, and it's a pleasure to have him with us today. Will?
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Will Phillips, and I'm the State Director with AARP. We represent approximately 650,000 members here in the state, and on behalf of all those members, wanted to thank the senators for bringing forward this legislation. quite frankly, it will lower the tax burden for many older Minnesotans, and we're hopeful that it will be embraced like it was in Iowa by members from both sides of the aisle. The vast majority of our members tell us that they want to continue to live in their homes and in their communities for as long as they can, with independence, with dignity, with all of those things. But as financial footings become difficult, that becomes even more difficult. And so we think that this legislation will go a long way toward helping not only current retirees, but all of those who are coming down the line, people that we see are facing growing retirement deficits with the decrease of pensions, with lower savings rates, anything that we can do to help people take home more of the Social Security benefits that they've earned over a lifetime of work, we think will do great things to enhance not only their retirement security, but also for the state of Minnesota. We know that 1 out of every 7 Minnesotans currently live in poverty, and that 28% of Minnesotans rely on Social Security for their only source of income. So clearly adjusting these thresholds that haven't been adjusted since they were created is critically important. We know that when you are retired, it's really tough to make any more money than you already are. Cost of living adjustments with Social Security, if they do come at all, are often small, and they don't keep up with things like ever-increasing costs for prescription drugs, utility costs, and other things like that. And so we think that as our state ages, it's in all of our best interests to make sure that our citizens can remain independent, to be able to age in their own homes and in their communities. And again, one of the ways that we can make sure that that happens and that we don't see people fleeing to other states with better tax treatment is to give these people a raise by lowering their tax burden. And that we think that in the end, the benefit to the state will be much greater than any revenue that we could have earned by continuing at these levels. So thank you very much.
Anybody else want to? Okay, thank you so much, Will. We do appreciate you being with us today. We'll just open it up for questions and see where it goes. Anyone?
Well, Senator,
is that easy?
have you talked to Senator Skoye or Senator Bach about this idea? I mean, any support among Democrats?
I've not yet talked to Senator Skoye or Senator Bach about this. Certainly, we'll certainly be doing that, obviously, as we go forward, trying to get a hearing on this bill and just trying to engender, as we go forward now, not only certainly legislative support, but support from the broad senior citizen population of Minnesota. And as they hear about it, I think they'll get excited and they'll help us in terms of ginning this up, so to speak.
Senator, did you say the first biennium in which this would be effective, it would cost the state $127 million? Is that the figure?
Do I what now?
Was that what the figure you gave? 127?
Yes, 127. I think it was 40 and 87. Yeah. 40 the first, 87 the second. Yes.
I think something that you miss when you just strictly take a look at that doing away with those amounts of Social Security income not being taxed, what you really miss, though, is the economic activity of tax revenues that come from them staying here. Because when they do, they spend money on movies, restaurants, theaters. They take their grandchildren with them. They give to local charities. They pay property taxes. So there's a lot of revenue that if you don't do this, you're going to hear the great big giant sucking sound of the southern states pulling our boomer retirees. And so this amount of having this tax subtraction and benefit to them is greatly outweighed by the tax revenues that you get from them staying here and spending their money in Minnesota. And they're great contributors and well worth working hard to keep.
Thank you.
The state is getting older, right? So what's the long-term impact of this, not just in this biennium, but in the next biennium and the one after that? I mean, if it's $40 million next year, how much is it going to be in the next cycle? Because
well,
the state's getting older, it means there's going to be more people retiring, which means...
Sure. If we weren't phasing this in, I'll just give you, for instance, the cost would be $398 million in 2017. $437 million in 2018, and projectedly going forward, to the extent they can project, $477 million in 2019. But you know, that's senior citizens paying taxes that they wouldn't have to pay if they were in 39 other states. So let's not necessarily call this a big cost. I think, frankly, it's an opportunity to get rid of this tax and keep these good people in Minnesota, like Senator Kiffmeyer has referred to. Yeah.
Warren Limmer, Maple Grove. A recent report coming out of the Minnesota Management and Budget Office was released today in the Finance Committee in the Minnesota Senate earlier this morning. I hadn't seen this until just this morning, but there's some projections that they're looking at our structural balance. And the planning estimates going all the way out to 2018 and 2019 show that the estimated difference going out, there is a little bump in the first year in 2016, and then we start growing as a surplus if everything remains the same in our budgets and our costs. 648 million, 1.1 billion, 1.6 billion. This is a growing structural balance that would be growing based upon our revenue stream as well as our expenses projected by this office out to 2019. That, in the short run, it means that this is a perfect time to consider a reform like this for our retirees that have to pay taxes on their retirement income, and namely focused only on the Social Security revenue that they receive. Clearly, when you look at Minnesota compared to the 30-plus other states that don't tax Social Security income, we are behind the times. And for the next, all the way out to 2019, we have a perfect example, a perfect opportunity to take this reform, move it forward, and with the desire of keeping our senior citizens here in the state. No one wants to leave their grandkids. No one wants to leave. You know, we've got a tough state in the wintertime with just the weather alone. But if we can fix what we can fix, and that's how we treat our senior citizens and their income, this is a perfect time, and the Office of Minnesota Management and Budget would give us at least a foundational perspective that they too might agree that if we were going to do this, if there was any time to do it, now would be the time to do it.
Senator Sanjamal, I'll just add one thing to that. I hope that the following question does not get lost. You know, we hope there's a hearing on this very worthy and needed bill, and I'm hoping the question is asked. I think the real question is, how much is Minnesota losing every year with 65-year-old and plus who retire and leave this state? I would like to have someone dig into that. How many are leaving every year, taking their property tax with them, taking their income tax with them, the sales tax, the gas tax, every aspect that you can think of is leaving with their pocketbooks when they choose to domicile, let's say, in their Florida condo instead of their Rochester home, which is now on the market. I know people who are doing this on a regular basis. And it is the tax climate that we have set up here. It is not sustainable. So as we get a hearing on this bill, let's make sure that question is asked, and I'm asking you, my friends in the press, to continue to ask that question. How much are we missing out on?
Actually, Senator, I was going to ask that question. And
okay.
I was wondering if the AARP might have any numbers on this. It doesn't seem like something that would be impossible to track, right?
You know, I don't know that we have numbers in terms of quantitating people who are leaving, but we certainly do have some numbers in terms of what we've quantified as the gross domestic product of the 50-plus population in Minnesota. We did a report with Oxford Economics to determine that across the country and then in state by state. I don't have the number with me, but if you do an AARP Oxford Economics search, you can certainly find that. It's called the longevity economy, and specifically as opposed to the 65-plus, it does look at the 50-plus.
So you're confident, though, that the number of retirees who would stay in Minnesota would more than make up the loss to revenue by now? You're absolutely certain of this?
I think anecdotally, every one of us, you know, you don't have to go to too many coffee shops or just be around the communities to know that so-and-so is retiring and so-and-so is moving. We hear it virtually every day. It's real, and I don't think we can ignore it anymore. Yes?
As an AARP member and as a retiree, I have had a number of friends They spend 5 months here and 6 months at a day in Florida and in Arizona, and even one family in Michigan, which surprises me. Now, actually, what I would like to see happen here is that this be a bipartisan bill, that you find a Democratic senator that would co-author and support the bill. I think too often when one party presents something, the other party's against it just because the other party presented it.
Sure.
So if there's a bipartisan possibility, I think the likelihood of action and passage could dramatically go up.
Senator Hand, is this, where does this rank on the priority scale, knowing that Republicans are pushing a different tax cut package, the governor is pushing a different tax cut package? Where does this rank in terms of priorities?
You're talking about priorities for us or priorities for the governor?
Or priorities for you?
Well, we think it's one of the top priorities. We talked
is it
earlier.
the top or is it one?
Well, it's one of the top. We've got several items that we're going to be talking about. This is certainly one of them, but we announced, or the forecast announced, a significant surplus. Our point was then, and it is today, that not every good thing happens through government spending, and I think this is a great example. We're talking about how this will affect the state budget that is in surplus today, but what we should be asking is, how does this affect the budgets of all the seniors, all the people who live in Minnesota? Shouldn't that be our priority, is to take care of the people who live here, make sure that their money, their income, doesn't get unnecessarily taxed? And I would say this is an unnecessary tax, has been pointed out by Senator Nelson and others. So we think this is a great example of how we should take this opportunity that we have to restructure or reform our tax code to the benefit of the people who live here and the benefit of, frankly, people who want to invest here. So.
I'd also, how can 39 other states do it and we can't? I mean, think about that question. How can 39 other states exempt Social Security taxation and we can't? So, are there any other questions? If not, thank you all for coming. We do appreciate it and look forward to any additional interviews or comments on this particular legislation going forward. Bye-bye.